Welcome back to another podcast. Thank you again for all the reviews that you have left on iTunes. And if you haven't followed our Flipping the Barrel LinkedIn page, make sure you do so you can stay up to date with everything FTV. Today, we have a wonderful guest, Gavin Rennick, who recently got appointed to president of New Energy at Schlumberger. Over his 27 plus year career, he has held several roles from field engineer to geo-market manager to handling the integration of Cameron, to then becoming president of Software Integrated Solutions. And most recently, prior to his latest position, he was the vice president of human resources at Schlumberger. I mean, talk about an exciting and incredible career, and not just in the US, but around the world. So we're excited to get to know you, Gavin, and thank you again for being here today.
Oh, thank you, ladies, for having me. I'm looking forward to this. It should be fun.
Well, Gavin, we're so excited to get started. We learned so much about you when we talked the other day. So let's really get the listeners, to really understand where you came from. So we know that you're originally from India, and at a young age, your parents actually decided to sell all their belongings, pack their bags, and move to Australia for a better future for the family and the kids, and just a better future overall. What event triggered your parents to make this jump to leave? Because it takes a lot to decide to move your family, into a country that you had never experienced before.
Yeah, I think I was born in Bangalore, and both my parents had great jobs and careers when they made that choice, and I have a lot to thank them for. I think at that point in time in the 80s, Australia was really, and still is in many ways, the lucky country in the world, and it was brimming with opportunity. And they were willing to sacrifice, what they had at the time, and take a big risk to do something that they felt was going to be better for their children. As a result of that, I would say courage. I ended up with the life that I have today, which I'm very grateful for. So, I guess there wasn't more or less to it than that, really.
Can you talk a little bit about what that was like growing up in Australia? A lot of people come on the podcast and their families immigrate. They usually go to the United States, and I see Australia as just such this beautiful country with so much opportunity as well. So, can you talk a little bit about what it was like growing up there?
Yeah, look, it was wonderful. We were, from a variety of reasons, we moved around a little bit. So I spent part of my childhood growing up in tiny little country towns, with dairy farms, and then on the beach. I spent most of my life in a town called Mandurah, which is a beautiful little beach town where the river runs into the ocean. And I think a lot of the time we reflect now that people that live there don't really know how good their life is. And so I had small groups of friends, grew up around a lot of working class people that got their hands dirty and like to fix things and make things happen. And I really enjoyed that. And then it teaches you lots of little things in life that are important later on. But I eventually moved to the city, and once I started to get educated and go to uni and things like that. So Western Australia is a wonderful place, and I couldn't think of too many better places in the world to be able to grow up. Yeah.
So you studied electrical engineering at the University of Western Australia, and you ended up working for Shell right after you graduated. What excited you to pick a career in oil and gas when you could have worked in really any industry with that kind of background? And at the time, if you think back, what was your perception on the oil and gas industry back then?
Yeah, look, I think when you're back there, when you're at that point in your life, you make decisions for different reasons. I think I grew up in a mining family. So both my father, who was a chemical engineer, and my mother, who worked as an admin and mine sites and stuff, worked for a mining company called Alcoa, a big aluminium company. And so as you do when you're a teenager, you want to do something that's exciting and impressive, that is not got nothing to do with what your parents do. And the biggest opportunities for engineers in Australia were either in mining and oil and gas. So if I ruled out mining, there was oil and gas had a certain romanticism to it because it was, out in the middle of the ocean and exciting and adventurous and all of that kind of good stuff. And you got to do really difficult work. And I was a little bit challenged by how difficult things were and being able to participate in those sorts of things. So I guess that's probably what drove my decision at the time to have an interest in the industry. And yeah, it worked out to be that and much more, as it turns out.
What was really interesting about your career is within 3 years of working for Shell, you talked to us about this family tradition that you and your siblings had, and you were actually encouraged to take a year off and travel the world. And now that's just passed down and everyone does it, which we thought was really cool. So you were 3 years into Shell, you were doing a great job. They really liked you. You decided, I'm going to take a sabbatical. I'm taking 1 year off. And you had plans to return to your previous role. However, mid-trip, your whole destiny was changed. You got a call from Schlumberger, and then you actually ended up leaving Shell. Can you talk about that and kind of explain, what that trip brought to you and like the perception it brought to you on what you wanted for your life and why you decided to actually move away from Shell?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I was moving away from Shell. Shell was a great company, and I started as a graduate there, and he's a great company and had a fantastic time. Look, my parents did not have the opportunity to experience the world before they made their big life decisions, and so in their lives, and so they wanted their kids to have the opportunity to do that and to travel and to really have their eyes opened before they made the big choices in life, which my mom defines as your career and your spouse, are the two big choices that you make in life to her. And so she started this tradition that both me and my brother participated in, and we'll pass down to our kids, where, on your 21st birthday, you get an around the world ticket, and off you go, and you don't make those big decisions until you do that and come back. Hopefully you come back. And so both of us did it. And I spent, the 18 months, I think, in total, across multiple trips traveling around the world. And I did leave my job at Shell, and it was, going backpacking was pretty normal back at the time in Australia. So Shell held my job for me. And as I was 2/3 of the way around, in fact, in Barcelona in Spain, I got a call from a recruiter. And I was so excited about international life and travel and adventure and whatnot at the time. I couldn't say no to an opportunity to go work overseas. And so that's how I ended up changing company. And yeah, I still have a great relationship with some of my former colleagues at Shell, who are all off doing different things now.
That's awesome. You never know kind of where life is going to take you. And I mean, if you wouldn't have taken that trip, you may not have gotten that phone call.
Who knows?
Who knows? Yeah. So after your trip around the world and backpacking, you ended up, like you mentioned, working for Schlumberger as a field engineer on a drilling rig in Saudi Arabia. This could be a difficult job because you're responsible for the entire operation, sometimes with a little support in a remote area. And unlike today, I mean, I'm sure there wasn't all of this technology and FaceTime and for you to keep in touch with your family. Can you tell us a little bit of kind of how that felt like? I think it must have been, obviously you're someone that's very adventurous, so it wasn't maybe shocks in that end, but you had just taken a sabbatical, you were enjoying your life, and then all of a sudden you're like back in the grind on a drilling rig, sweating. I mean, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it was a completely different environment. And yes, we were far from the connectivity we have today. I think I was allowed one telephone call a day to my boss, and that was about it, unless something was really going wrong. But at the same time, I mean, it was a different sort of experience, and I was learning and experiencing some totally different things working out in the desert in Saudi. And obviously Saudi today is a far different place to what it was back then. Again, I think that when you are learning and experiencing things, there's a certain joy and satisfaction that comes out of that. And I count that as a great experience. I really enjoyed my time in Saudi, and that being dropped in a completely different environment.
I bet that had to have been at first really exciting, and two, you're probably like a little nervous once you realize I can only have one phone call a day. Was there any time during that where you were like, I really need to talk to somebody and I can't call someone? And if that did happen, how did you overcome it?
Yeah, I think there are often periods of time where you need support. And I think that you find sometimes when your usual, if you like, avenues of support aren't there, you find different ones. And that's a way that you sometimes build relationships. You build relationships, I think, the really strong ones by either asking for help or giving help. And so I actually connected with folks who I still know who are off doing other things in the industry now during that period, because they were my support line when I didn't have something else. And I think that's probably the way to do it. You find great people in the most interesting little places, right? And certainly that was my experience.
I love that. And that's so true. When you're in those moments of hard times and you can't call what you're like comfortable usually doing, you have to reach out and talk to people who maybe you would have never asked for before. So I think that's really great. Well, moving on, you had several roles, moving up in Schlumberger, and then you actually ended up taking a role back in Australia. And while you were in Australia, you made a really big impact. You were able to triple the revenue of the location, and you actually create a very successful business within like a 3-year time span, which is really impressive. And you actually have a coin in your office now that you gave to your team that we thought was really cool as a symbol of, y'all's accomplishments. But what's really interesting is that after that happened, you had the opportunity to actually possibly take on a bigger role that would have been a promotion. But instead, you decided to do more of a lateral movement into an engineering role back in the United States. And when we talked, you said it was mainly because you wanted to learn that avenue as well and take on something challenging. Can you talk about, when you're in those instances, most people are always wanting to move up and they're so worried about their next position that maybe they lose sight of really what job they should take from a growth perspective. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I will. But let me clarify one thing a little bit on the way that you asked that question. I loved my time in Australia and I'm extremely proud of that period of time. But it wasn't me that did those things, right?
Yeah.
I was fortunate to work with an exceptional group of people. And the team that we had in place and the team that was a much bigger team when I left, we were able to attract, we were able to put together, and that team was able to do things that no individual in that team thought was possible. And I think that's what's so special to me about that experience, because it was really us, a group of people who literally said, wow, well, what's the best that we could possibly do, and let's shoot for 50% more, and somehow made that happen. And I think that's the important thing about that experience. And it's true that while I was living there, I had lots of career conversation, and who knows what could or couldn't have happened. But I did leave there thinking about what I didn't know, and I'm learning and the things that you didn't know than necessarily what was the next job or the next promotion or whatever else, right? And I was fortunate at the time. I met a guy who was our CTO and who I've known for a long period, Galashak Balani, who was a visionary technology guy, and he got me a little bit excited, and I realized that I didn't know a lot about the creation of technology and innovation and how all of the engineering that was really the foundation of our company worked. And so I asked for a job, and I really would have taken any job kind of that was interesting and there or thereabouts in that space. And I was fortunate to be given one. And so I was able to look after a big part of our engineering and manufacturing portfolio. But more importantly, I was able to learn about how all of this wonderful world of product development and technology and the creation of it worked. And that was hugely useful for me down the track, because it allowed me to see the company and business and other companies indeed in a completely different fashion to what I had experienced before then. So that was lucky, and I'm very grateful for that experience and opportunity.
I love that, because it somewhat also teaches you that you weren't so focused on the title and on the upward climb in your career, and you were okay this was still somewhat of a promotion, but after such a success in Australia, being the leader of such an amazing team, you could probably ask for more and said, look at what I've done. But you really were thoughtful in your career. What else do I need to learn, versus just focusing on this title that you could have potentially got if not. So it teaches you a lot of it like, don't chase titles and just learn as much as you can. So I love that.
I think people's thinking, if you are really honest with yourself, evolves. You start when you're starting your career, it's about how fast you can get promoted and how much money you can make. Then maybe it's about what title and what responsibility you have and how many people you manage and all that kind of stuff. That's something that you think about. But I think then when you get to a point, and for me it was probably the Australia job, where your thinking switches and you start to be motivated more by how much impact you can have and what you can create and what you can do for other people that work with you. And then it sort of evolves even more to what you can learn and how much more impact you can have in a broader sense, not just necessarily within the company, but outside and in the bigger world and so on and so forth. And I think I think most people probably go through that kind of journey, and it's okay that you as you grow, your thinking expands and changes. And so that certainly has been what it has been for me.
So bringing you back to a different topic somewhat, we've had a lot of people on the podcast talk about their struggles of imposter syndrome, and that usually is coming from women. One common finding is that oftentimes they are offered a promotion or a bigger role that they feel incompetent to do the job because they aren't confident that they have the right skill set. There's actually some stats showcasing that, for example, for a position that's opening, women think they need to have every single thing on the job description before they apply for it because they are not sure, while as men can have one or two out of the 15 things and they'll apply for it. Do you find you've had similar doubts about big roles? I mean, I've listed the roles that you had. Those are some big titles that come with a lot of stress to perform. Do you always felt confident and you said like, I got this, and it's something that you've worked yourself to overcome? Or did you also struggle with how am I going to deliver?
Yeah, I think earlier in the podcast, you guys asked about the first experience, and the first experience, I was completely out of my environment. And so you are not confident and you are uneasy and you feel unsure of yourself and all of those things, right? And I think that's probably somehow magnified with women, and that's certainly what some of the research tells us and some of the feedback I have in some of my jobs. And I think that the secret is that men don't feel any differently, but I think that we sometimes might find it easier to be comfortable with not knowing everything and being uneasy. And I think it is a skill. I think it now, with each position that I've accepted in the last decade, I've been uncomfortable for the first 6 months to 1 year, and during a period where you're intensely learning and trying to come to grips with the challenge ahead of you. And I think if just be knowing that fact and that it's okay to feel uncomfortable. And then I think for women, stepping back and saying, look, other people have felt uncomfortable and taken this risk, and there's no reason that I shouldn't, is an important mental process to go through. And I think that when it comes to successful ladies, whatever role they may have, having a support network that tells them that, and continuing to give them data that reinforces that it's absolutely okay to take those risks is a really important thing. And I hope we get better and better at it.
I love that. And I think that's true. Like it's giving people that feeling of confidence to be able to go and do it. And, that's going to take not just the person, but the environment the person's in too. So if the company can create that kind of culture, it would really help, not just women, but men and minorities as well. You took on the role as the VP of HR during the COVID pandemic. How did you handle the aspect of people at such a hard time across the world with different cultures, thoughts, ideas, diversity, and such a massive organization with such a pandemic that we've never experienced before? How were you able to, send the right message to all of your employees, kind of with no script, because this had never happened before?
Yeah, I mean, these are, as my family would refer to it, character building moments, right? I think that there are three words for me that are really important that probably were the core how I was guided through that time. And I think I could say that for a few of our leaders: integrity, honesty, and to the point that you can absolutely give it brutal transparency. And probably one of the most difficult things, I actually recorded a webcast during that period where we were laying off a lot of people, and I was trying to help our young managers who'd never experienced that really terrible situation before, do it in a way that treated all of our people in the company with respect, and educate them on how that was happening. That was tough for me, and it was no doubt tough for them, but we were trying to do it in a way that was completely transparent and treated people, with the integrity that they deserve. So these are difficult things, but if you stay with your principles, if you make choices that are for the right reasons, if you ensure you don't have bias, you do things in a really, really transparent way, I believe that you get respect, regardless of how difficult the situation may be, and people down the track, it builds confidence in you as an organization and what you stand for, and that's what we tried to do. And I don't believe that we were successful 100% of the time, but I certainly believe we tried 100% of the time, and I think that that's the most you can do in that sort of situation.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. That must have been a very difficult role, as well as the CEOs or just all the C-suites, because there's 80,000 plus people below you that are counting on you and their families. So that must have been very difficult. Another question before we close. This is the second one before we close. The higher you move up in any role, we just know there's the higher pressure to perform and deliver. There's a lot of stress that comes with these roles. What are some of the daily habits that you practice to stay in mental shape in order to manage this kind of stress? Do you have like 2-3 daily habits that you can share with us? And how do you handle as well your work-life balance with your family and your 2 young teenagers when sometimes you have to travel a lot and not be home or present or miss their school, their football games, or basketball, or whatever it is that they do? How do you handle that?
Yeah, I think that for, work-life balance thing, little rituals help for me, and finding the things that you do with the most important people in your life, your family, are really important. Even if you can't do that all of the time, the fact that you do it whenever you can and you do it consistently matters. So, for me, there are little things like my wife and I always talk before we go to bed every night, regardless of where I am on the planet. My kids, when I'm home on a weekend, I like old cars. I have a vintage Mustang, and so my boys love to jump in the back of that, and I take them for a haircut, or I take them down the shop for a smoothie whenever I'm in town on a Saturday morning. So, and you make it to the school events or the basketball games. My oldest is big enough now that I run with him, and so when you have activities like that you do whenever you can together, these are quality pieces of time, particularly one-on-one. Actually, a great piece of advice I got given by one of our another person in the company early in my career was always try to take at least a week and with your wife, just the 2 of you, where you drop the kids and you go somewhere in the world. And we've tried. We haven't always succeeded every year to do that, but we've tried, and it works. It's important. So these little things are pretty important, I think, from a personal point of view, and being able to do that. And then you need to have the things that you don't compromise that are important. That there are important moments in life where you are there. And I think that more and more the world is finding a way for that to happen. So that's the work-life balance bit. What was the first part of that question?
Do you have any daily rituals that you do? What does your morning look like?
I try to exercise at least every second day. I run. I like to run. If I can every day. So I think exercise is really important. I think health is really important. And then at night, before I go to bed, I talk to my wife, and then we try to do something that's not work. So I'll read a book that I'm interested in on something that's totally different direction, or we will, we'll do something together. But we do something that completely switches me off and gets my brain thinking about something else before I go to bed. And then everything in between is just happening. Whatever, depends on what the situation is, right? So that's probably what we do.
I love the advice of, having those rituals too with your family and the Saturday mornings with your sons. And I think that's so important to have those moments with your children, and then also those moments with, your significant other. And I love the going on, a trip a year together. It's so important to spend that time. So thank you so much for sharing. And lastly, we don't want to miss out on the new position that you've recently been appointed to as the president of New Energy, which is such a big role, but also just a very exciting time in our industry with not just the energy transition, but just we know oil and gas is not going to go anywhere, but we also know that there is this need in the world for something else. And so it's really exciting for you to be taking this role. And what we'd like to ask you is, what kind of advice would you give to those young engineers that are graduating, that have looked at our industry and thought, I don't want to get into something like this. I don't like oil and gas, let's say. And even though we're trying to transition into something more of a new energy spectrum, what would you say to those engineers to get them to come in? And then also those that are have been in the industry for a while and kind of feel more threatened by this energy transition. It's two different mindsets, but they're two very important ones for retention and also for new talent. What kind of advice would you give to those people?
Yeah, look, when I joined this industry, there was always the romantic vision in the top of my mind that I was turning the lights on the planet in the best possible way. And today, I think in the energy transition and everything else, people joining the industry have exactly that same challenge, that they're turning the lights on across the planet and making the world work in the best possible way. And there are a whole set of different challenges, and the ways that we're doing it are different. And the responsibility we have to the kids being born in Africa, as well as to the people being born in New York City or Europe or wherever else we are in the world, is the same. And I think that the challenges are technical. The problems of the world are, they require the support of policy, they require the support of government, but they're engineering problems. And engineers that enter this industry at this time have such a huge array of possibilities. And I always feel that periods of change and transition are where you have the most exciting careers, you have the most opportunity, you have the most ability to have an impact in a really, really good way. And so, I'm extraordinarily lucky to be in this job at this point in time. And I think that, everybody that works in our industry or in whatever role they play, and certainly in our organization as we look for the solutions for the future, is going to have a tremendously good time, and people are going to do very well, and they're going to have rich and exciting lives and careers as a result. So myself, I'm super excited, and I show up and work in the morning, and I talk to my team about, we're here to decarbonize the planet. We're here to create the future. We're here to do things that, children and grandchildren will rely on for their lives and their careers. And it's just such an exciting period of time. So it's fantastic to have an opportunity to be involved.
That's awesome. We could tell the passion behind it. You seem so happy and light up just when you talk about it. So that's awesome. Congratulations on that role. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I think a lot of listeners are very excited to just get to know a little bit more about you. And thank you for sharing your journey with us. And yes, thank you again, Gavin.
Thank you, ladies. And I will say, I've been watching the podcast from a distance for a while. And I think that some of the things that the two of you are doing to help women in particular be successful in this industry is really important. And kudos to you for what you all have achieved with that.
Thank you. We really appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Gavin.
Thanks.